And we're back for another episode of Won't Be Silent. I am honored to have Ittay Flescher here. Did I say your name right?
Ittay Flescher with no T.
Ittay.
Yeah,
Okay. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's lovely to be here.
No, it's my pleasure. So I discovered you through a podcast or a conversation you had on Haaretz. So I was intrigued and I went on the mission to find you, and here we are. Let's talk about your work, your book, who you are. And the one thing I just want to preface with everyone is that Ittay is a peace peacenik. Is that do you mind if I
Yeah,
use that
yeah, I'm
title?
happy with that. I usually call naive and delusional, so Peacenik is fine. I actually like that much better. Yeah.
Well, I'm like a remnant from like the Vietnam War peaceniks, believe it or
Mhm.
not. That's how old
Yeah.
I am. But I was in grade school, but that's when my first, acknowledgement of wanting peace kind of came into my idea. So
Right.
take it away.
So I'm the author of a book called The Holy and the Broken, which was just published this month with HarperCollins in the United States. And it's a book about my life and my work and my hope for the future. So, a little bit about me that I was born in Israel. I grew up in Australia. My parents moved there when I was a child, and I went to a Jewish school there. I was a high school teacher for 15 years, teaching Jewish history, religion and society, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And then I moved to Jerusalem in 2018 with my family, my wife, and my two children. And since then, I've been working at an organization called Kids for Peace, which is now part of Seeds of Peace. And in that organization, I facilitate dialogue between Israeli and Palestinian children. And I think that's had a profound effect on me and how I see the world. And I think also, especially being here since October 7th, has given me a lot of very confronting moments, to be honest, in terms of what I've seen, but also being sort of in a peace organization that's in the eye of the storm, where there's a lot of calm and cooperation at a time when very few Israelis, Palestinians, or the supporters around the world not even can talk to each other, can't even be in a room with each other. I think gave me a lot of insights into what the possibility of dialogue can bring, and that's really what my book is about.
So how does it, I mean, the thing is, from the mouth of babes is that expression. So that I would imagine working with kids, you see probably a little bit more mature, more maturity in her terms of how they want to deal with one another, as opposed to the adults, right?
Yeah, look, I think because when the kids that come to our program, the youngest are age 11. So we're not talking about the two-state solution or international law, like the kind of conversations
Right.
that adults often have about this country. We're talking about their lives, the food they eat, whether they could get to school today, what happened at the checkpoints, their experience of the most recent festival, clothing, culture. The dialogue is because kids often, adults often when they have conversations, they bring in things like, but what about this thing in 1937 and in 1948 and in 19 and kids just say, what about this thing that happened yesterday?
Right,
Like
right,
the
right.
the examples they bring are just things from their lives. They don't dwell on, historic examples and that sort of thing because their frame of reference is obviously a lot more recent. And so even though the tensions are still the same tensions that might exist between adults, I think there's an innocence of kids, and maybe they're not bitter and twisted and like a lot of the adults are. And I've worked with kids my whole life, and I think it's really important to be in a place where you can help shape formative experiences in kids' lives, because so many kids in Jerusalem, I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but we don't have what you in the United States call public schools here. So
Mm.
in the United States, you can have a public school and there'll be African American kids and Latino kids and Jewish kids and white kids, and they'll all be in the same school. So that doesn't happen in Jerusalem. We have schools that are only for Haredim. schools that are only for secular Jews, schools that are only for religious Zionist Jews, schools for only for Christian Palestinians, schools only for the Muslim
Wow.
Palestinians, schools only for boys, schools only for girls. There's no school that has everyone. We just don't have public schools here. A lot of those schools are publicly funded, but they're each has their own curriculum and their own exams, and they teach history in a very different way. And unfortunately, all those schools I mentioned don't really teach nice things about the kids who go to the other
Oh no.
ideologies.
Well,
And
that's a
that's how
problem.
parents like it. Parents want
Mm.
their kids to go to a school that, like if you're Haredi, you want your school to go to a kid that's only with ultra-Orthodox kids, and you'll learn an ultra-Orthodox way of life and study Torah. And if you're secular, you'll learn about, LGBT rights and environmentalism and feminism and all sorts of ideologies that would be foreign to let's say, an ultra-Orthodox school. And so, and we get kids from all of those different backgrounds coming into Kids for Peace. And so we meet after school, and what we're trying to say is it's obviously your right to have an education that aligns with your values of, the things that you want to learn. But we also believe that it's important for you to have exposure to, other kids and other cultures, and that's why we do what we do.
So how do they find out about these after school kind of programs? Is there outreach into the different
Yeah,
schools?
so
Okay.
look, we've been running for over 21 years now in Jerusalem. So there's a lot of word of mouth, and one sibling brings a younger sibling. We're active on social media. I go into various schools at the beginning of each year and do a talk about it.
Mm.
Um, there's various WhatsApp groups that we advertise in. So, we've got 71 kids in the program this year. There's much larger movements, obviously, than Kids for Peace, but it's a sizable number of kids that want to have this experience and believe it's important.
I just watched that film that's here in America anyway. It's called The Children of October 7th, and it's interviewing kids from that had survived the incidents.
Yeah,
And there's also, I've seen films just talking to the adults, and listening to the kids is so much more impactful. Not that
yeah,
anyone's tragedy is worse, or no judgment on that, but just there's a purity to their kind of reaction. Some of them are so strong in their
yeah,
resolve about moving forward at 12. It's just incredible. So tell us about your book, please.
yeah. So the book is called The Holy and the Broken. It comes from a Leonard Cohen song, Hallelujah.
Mm,
And for those that aren't familiar, that song is about an incident that happened in Jerusalem some 2,000 years ago, where King David saw a woman bathing on the roof, and as Leonard Cohen said, her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. And he approached that woman, and they had an affair. And then he arranged for her husband to be killed. The woman's name was Bathsheba,
mm. All
and
right, I know that story.
yeah, and it's in the book of Samuel. And most kings that would do such a thing shouldn't be king anymore. That's a very horrible thing to have an affair and then have the husband killed. And and then something happens that's quite amazing, and the song Hallelujah is about this, where King David, instead of denying that he did this wrong thing, or saying it wasn't my fault, or so, something like that, he admits that he did the wrong thing. He suffers four very serious punishments, one of which is the death of the first child that he has with Bathsheba. And then the second child they have together is King Solomon, the great King Solomon that builds the temple.
Mhm.
And King David is seen as this archetype of tshuva, which means repentance in Hebrew. That he's a king that does something horrible, and then he repents, and then because he repents and suffers a punishment as well, he's able to be forgiven, and then goes on to be arguably one of the greatest characters in Jewish history. And
Mm.
I think now we're at a point where a lot of Israelis can't forgive Palestinians and don't believe they'll ever change. And a lot of Palestinians can't forgive Israelis and don't believe we'll ever change. And so, me taking that story of King David and putting that in the title of my book, in a city that is often called the Holy City, that is obviously deeply broken now by this war, I think it captures what the book is about, which is A, the possibility that people can change, B, the idea that this is a time where so many people are broken and so many social norms have been broken and so many international laws have been broken here. And then the last thing is that if we can embrace the idea that this is a holy city for all people, that is the way to peace. And then the book from there goes into all the examples of where peace exists today on a very, very small scale. And then it explores how to take those things that are all working now for peace and extrapolate them into, a larger political peace for all people in this land.
Well, my takeaway from that is how forgiveness is such a it's the best part of human beings is that we have the power to forgive. That's my perception, and it's in my particular book. It's kind of just you forgive yourself. You have to forgive yourself first, I believe, to then
Yeah.
be able to really honestly forgive other people. It's not easy, and
No.
sometimes there's just situations that you just wash your hands from it rather than try to get people to kind of come around, I guess.
Mm.
But yeah, that's an amazing theme to, yeah, at the moment we're living in, especially.
Mm.
What's the response been?
Look, so the book sold now 2,000 copies in Australia. Just went on sale this month in the US. So I'm not sure the number of
Congratulations.
sales yet, but I know a lot of people that are reading it are sending me very long emails. And in those emails, they are not just writing about their book, but um, they're writing about, and these are people that don't even live in Palestine or Israel. They're just writing about how this war has affected their lives and affected their friendships and affected their relationships with their bosses or their partners or organizations they were part of or places they've been alienated. And a lot of people are reading the book and then sort of writing to me as if I'm their therapist, which is interesting. I feel like, I feel like my phone has become an Israel-Palestine hotline for people that have been traumatized by this war. And a lot of people read the book and then they feel they know me. And it's nice that they feel that way because I am very vulnerable in the book about a lot of thoughts and ideas and experiences that have happened to me, and also a lot of ways that I've overcome sort of challenging situations in my life. And then I try to the people that reach out to me, I respond to every email. Sometimes also arrange a Zoom call with people that write to me because I really want this book to be not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a conversation because I feel like um, in the same way that there's trauma from a relationship ending, I think there's so much trauma from the violence that people have seen from, in case of Jews, from October 7th, in the case of Palestinians, from the destruction of Gaza, where they're looking for a place to process that and they're looking for hope. And so people reaching out to me are asking both for me to help them process trauma and despair as well. Despair of
Wow.
the hostages still being there, despair that, there was just announced today that the war is continuing and even accelerating. And we're 18 months into this and there's no end in sight. And it's I think if you're a person that wants to see peace between Israelis and Palestinians, this is the hardest time in living memory to be alive when you see this horror and this bloodshed going on. And then it's also been replicated in so many other places because I guess unlike other conflicts in the world, Israel-Palestine is a totemic conflict. So, there was just an election in Australia, which is a country that has nothing to do with this place, and Israel-Palestine is a big issue. Obviously, in
Right.
the US, in the UK, on campuses, in schools, in arts venues, in music, in concerts, in sports clubs, like so many areas of the world that are not really connected to this conflict have either latched on to one side or another, and then
Well,
use this as an expression of their values, relating to Islam, relating to the West, the US, human rights, etc. And I don't know of any other conflict in the world that has become present in so many other places that are so far away from it. I don't think that happened with Russia, Ukraine. It didn't happen with Sudan. It didn't happen with Syria. But for some reason, this is a conflict that, I don't know if there's a single person in the world that doesn't know about it or have an opinion about it. And so, and the fact that it is such an international conflict with so many countries, regularly making statements, opinions, protest demonstrations, all of those things about it, means that if you're a person that is sort of looking for something beyond those 3-word slogans, then I hope that my book would be a place that you could find some comfort and perhaps a different voice than the one that you usually hear.
Well, the unfortunate thing is really how well funded all that kind of global kind of propaganda that has affected every industry. I mean, the film industry and the fashion industry now, there's like a whole new initiative called Fashion Fund that's totally funded by the Princess of Hoo-Ha, whatever. In any event, we finally had peace with Germany after World War II. So that was a process. And if there's any chance of hope for peace in this situation, there are certain things that the Marshall Plan kind of implemented in terms of, a strategic breaking down of spaces.
Yeah.
And so in theory, if you can kind of end that war, I mean, if you think about how we destroyed so much of Germany, we're in a different time because of social media, of course, as you know.
Yeah.
So we're not comparing apples to apples. We don't know what peace is going to look like. But hopefully we just can't be doing this in perpetuity. I mean, that's like, I don't understand how that goes forward the way it's going forward. And I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah, so
you do too,
first, I just want to say I'm not a politician, and this book is not like a political roadmap, dealing with the geostrategic counterterrorism, all of that. There's many books on that I can recommend. But what I write about is on a grassroots level, what needs to happen for there to be peace. So obviously politicians, they need to sign agreements, and there's various agreements that I look at and how they can be effective, and they change over time. But I think in addition to the lack of political will, definitely among Hamas, I think also among the Israeli government, I think there's also an issue of belief. So I think a lot of people look at the situation and they go, "This is impossible. There's no way this is ever going to end," and then they become resigned to the fact that our fate is to live by the sword, and then we're going to fight each other forever. So a lot of what I talk about in the book is I give examples of other movements that started where the peace movement started today. So for example, like take the suffragettes 100 years ago. So they come up with this crazy idea that women should vote. And when the suffragettes say this idea that women, most women don't even agree with them. Most women are like, "Are you crazy? Women are not educated. It's gonna lead to petticoat rule. It's gonna, like there's all this hatred of the suffragettes." They're like, "No, no, no. Women should vote, and it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good for everyone if women vote." And there's struggles, and they're arrested, and all of these things happen. And then you look now 100 years later, and every country on earth, even Saudi Arabia, even Iran, every country on earth, women can vote. That happened in 100 years, to go from this idea that was totally like marginalized and crazy, and slowly and slowly the suffragettes, and then later the feminist movement, and built up this idea, the simple idea that women could vote. And then from that, many other things happened. Women, obviously now can work and study and drive, and they have, not in every country on earth, but in most countries on earth, it's much better to be a woman today than it was 100 years ago. And that's an example of a movement. I'd say the same thing with LGBT rights. Think of where that was when I was born. Today, maybe not with this White House, but the previous administration's flying a pride flag on top of the White House. Like, that's an amazing progress to happen in a lifetime. And there's marriage equality in several states in the US as well. So, change can happen from, very marginal ideas can become very mainstream when small groups of people gradually build power and build a belief that this is possible. And so, in addition to the many, many political obstacles, I think there's also a mental obstacle that we have to overcome, that says that our fate is to destroy one another, that it's either Israel or Palestine, and there's no way to share this land. And I think people that are stuck in that ideology, and they say the other side is uniquely evil and there's no one I can talk to on the other side, which is what a lot of Palestinians say of Israelis and a lot of Israelis say of Palestinians. And then they look at October 7th and the destruction of Gaza and they say, look, that proves my point. They're monsters. They're monsters. And I'm like, these horrible things happened and I can't change that. That is a reality that happened. I'm terribly sad and I grieve all of those deaths. But what can I do to make sure they don't happen again? And to keep fighting is not one of those things. If I want these things not to happen again, it's going to take a really long time. And I know there's a lot of cardinals now, sitting in the conclave trying to choose a new pope. So we also need to sit. And yeah, maybe black smoke is going to come out many, many times before there's white smoke. But I know because Israelis and Palestinians have been very, very close on many, many occasions in many negotiations about negotiating a deal. And there's a way to do this. There's hundreds of think tanks and experts that have suggested deals to return the hostages, deals to end the war, deals for a ceasefire, deals for the rebuilding of Gaza. We all know that there's solutions possible. We need to just accept that war is not the way to do this. And that feels like, I feel like I'm yelling into the wind when I
Well,
say,
and I understand that, and I understand how that feels. And although, as much as I am infuriated and horrified and angry and incensed about everything, as a truly honest Zionist, but not in the traditional way that is being used to the words as it's kind of negative, but in the pure sense of just that returning to the land of Zion is this kind of simple, pure essence of what being a Zionist is. But that's the initiative I'm working on with Orly. It's this opportunity to find those people to break bread at this kind of digital space to talk about our similarities, not only our differences. And we're identifying it's film-centric and entertainment industry-centric, but that's an extension of how perception of what's happening on the ground is translated into film, and to find, is that a true representation of what's happening, and having that dialogue. So yeah, it's going to start with
maybe I just want to make a comment on film because I think film is an incredibly powerful medium because, there's a lot of places that I can never go to. I can't go into a Haredi family and live in their house, but I can watch this all and understand what life is like for a Haredi family. Or I can't go and live in pray in a mosque in Turkey tomorrow, but I can watch a film about that. And there's something about film that can take you in, through the eyes of one person, whether it's a documentary or a fictional film, and it can humanize a group that you've been taught to hate. And I think of especially the LGBT movement, of how many characters, how many same-sex characters there are in movies now that are so normalized. Like it's not even controversial anymore to see a same-sex character in a romantic comedy or whatever, in the same way that you would see a heterosexual couple, and it just makes it something you're not afraid of. And it doesn't, and I often think, when do I ever see Israeli and Palestinian characters on film acting in a peaceful way? Never. Like most films, show war and checkpoints, and I'm sure that will be the case of the films that come out of Gaza and the October 7th films as well. But I think film is a very powerful humanization tool. And I hope that peace builders, in addition to doing dialogue like what we do in Jerusalem, also invest in creating films that tell stories that show a reality that doesn't exist right now.
That's the conversation we're having. And coincidentally, my friend just sent me, which I have to watch this week, a film called Father, Father, about a gay Palestinian and a gay Israeli who are married, and they want to adopt a kid, and they adopt a kid they get the child on October 6th, 2023. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But that's exactly what, human stories of life on the ground, if you're within that culture. Yeah, I think we're going to see that. I know we have to see it. I do know the Johar Film Institute is rolling out a whole bunch of anti-Israel films. So we're up against not having the kind of funding that the oil nations are blessed to have, but that's a process that we're addressing in this group that I'm with, right? But It's a pleasure to have this moment with you. I think what you're doing is important. And if everyone can just make sure you go and buy the book one more time, the name.
Yes, the book is called The Holy and the Broken, A Cry for Peace from a Land That Must Be Shared. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of those places, and also on my website, ittay.au, ittay.au. There's a section that says, "What can I do?" So it's for people that have already read the book, and then they're looking to maybe start a book club or a podcast club or run a dialogue group, or they're looking to support peace building organizations in Israel and Palestine. And there's a whole lot of resources there for people that have read the book that want to support a different reality in this land. So I encourage people not only to read the book, but also to visit the website for the resources there. And that's where you can also contact me, and happy to engage. And maybe I'll end up on your podcast like I did with Abe as well.
Yeah, and if you put it, email me and I'll put it in the show notes, and and in the blog for Times of Israel, I'll just do it with a little, send me also a snippet of the book or just a little brief.
Sure. Will do.
All that information. And thank you so much. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Lovely to be with you, and maybe
absolute pleasure.
Better days.
Definitely. I hope I actually am one of the lucky people who get, I just ran for World Zionist Congress. The election ended yesterday. So if all goes well, I will see you in October.
Yes, I'll see you in Jerusalem. That would be lovely.
Definitely. This year in Jerusalem.
See you later.
Have a great day.